I mean, I find this in myself. Maybe you could speak to that. If I, looking at past relationships, if I just think about, or maybe speak to others about the positive things, really just think like I focus my mind on the positive memories, and then everything just becomes more positive. And I think it makes me feel like I'm way happier about my past. So there must be something to that, because I almost start to forget that the negative stuff happened. And then the same thing on the flip side is if you focus on the negative, then the negative stuff just overpowers everything else, and you have a very heavy negative feeling about your past. So that seems like the way to live a healthy life, a happy life, is just to focus on the positive. Not to sound cliche, but like basically modifying your memories continuously that everything was just great. Is there something to that?
Well, the essence of that is right. There is something called state-dependent memory, which is that you're more likely to remember things that were consolidated or created as memories if they match the state that you're in now. So if you are sad now and your brain's sort of just going, you're more likely to remember other sad times because your memory and the emotional state of your brain is basically already activating those networks of sadness. And it's like, here's some other sad things and shitty things that happened to you. And it's the same with if you're embarrassed. That's the sort of classic one that we usually use as memory researchers, is that moment where you do something embarrassing and for the next 6 hours all you're thinking of is all the other embarrassing things you've ever done. And it's like your brain is like, would you like some other embarrassing stories? And obviously you're going, no, thank you. Please stop. But you have this spreading activation, as it's called, of just these synapses just like lighting up new networks. And you're going, and there's this other memory that's attached to the same feeling. And so it's the same with happiness, is that people who are happier tend to remember more happy memories. And so most of the time, unless you're depressed, most people look back at their lives with this sort of rosy reminiscence bias, and they're more likely to remember the positives than the negatives. But it's not quite the way you were describing it, actually. So it's not quite that you only remember the good, the objectively good things that happened. It's more that your interpretation of the things that you've experienced is either neutral or positive. So for me, for example, growing up with my father with paranoid schizophrenia, that is something that I see as a net positive. So obviously at the time it was experienced in a complicated way, but in hindsight, it defined my life and it completely gave me a perspective of the human mind that I just wouldn't have had otherwise. And so I see that as a positive part of my autobiography. And that is what good therapy should be doing, is it should be taking negative experiences and not overwriting them or changing them. I mean, our brains do that naturally anyway. But trying to work with what you've got, the experiences, the true experiences, but then just shifting the emotional content so that how you're dealing with them now is good.
How much of what this Danny Kahneman type of idea that we live a lot of our life in memory, like it's not, there's the direct in the moment experience of a thing, and then there's remembering that thing over and over and over and over. So there's like, I don't know, getting married or whatever, like some pleasant thing that if you, over a lifetime, the pleasure you derive from that thing is disproportionately. Most of it is from remembering the thing versus experiencing it. Is there something to that?
I think so. And his experiments where he asked participants if they were offered this holiday that they could go on,
Mm-hmm.
but they wouldn't remember it. So they'd have the present day experience of enjoyment on this holiday. I think it was a tropical vacation or something that he'd
That's
offered
right.
people. And he then said, well, but you're not going to be able to remember this. Would you still go? And a lot of people say, no, I wouldn't go on that holiday if I can't remember it. I think that's interesting. And I think that sort of Pixar didn't happen. Sort of the social media generation obviously is perhaps even more in line with that also in terms of how you deal with that in social context, sort of sharing those memories with others and those experiences and which experiences end up being the important ones in our lives.
Yeah, there's a real case to be made. There's this kind of ridiculous thing that happens now. Whenever something cool is happening, people take out their phones and film it. But the case for that is that, yeah, this gives you actual something to look back at, that it's worthwhile to take a picture, actually.
Although it's even more worthwhile to pay attention. So attention is the glue between reality and memory. And so if you're using your phone to not have to pay attention and not have to put any work into remembering it, then you're going to look at that picture later and go, what was this? Because you've tried to outsource it in a way that our brains don't work.
How hard is it to modify memories from a neuroscience perspective? So if you look at brain-computer interfaces like Neuralink, for example, do you think there's a future where we're implanting or modifying memories directly?
Yeah. I mean, that's basically what we do as human beings already. And I don't see why tech couldn't do exactly the same thing.
To speed that up. So right now we could do that with language, right?
Yeah.
We just talk to each other and modify them, and we just speed that up.
Language, but also think about it yourself. So you can, it's called auto-suggestion, when you suggest things to yourself that didn't happen. And that often comes from reading something or seeing something or thinking about something or hearing somebody else's story and going, does something like that happen to me? And then you start picturing it and thinking about in what context it could have. And then you start to basically implant a false memory in yourself. And so that can happen as well. And I think with things like Neuralink, it would be the same, where you'd have the ability to do that but again, I still think that this interaction between humans and AI or AI-like systems is the same as a social interaction, which is why I was saying it's so important. I think that we have social psychologists in the room, because ultimately, whether it's an AI or another person, it's the same brain that you're modifying.
So what you're worried about there is that you become untethered from reality, like you fabricate too many details about the memory. Like if human is interacting with AI and AI is telling the human what they want to hear, are you worried about over time you start to just have a very overly modified version of your past narrative?
I'm not necessarily worried about the fact that AI and generative AI can create false memories. That is, again, something we've also been doing for a long time. Like modified photos is something pre-AI that we had that was already messing with people's minds. Even just what you have in the frame of a shot. So if you take a holiday snap and you're omitting like a really important part of what actually happened on that holiday because you're taking a picture of the nicest part and not the garbage behind you.
Yeah.
That is going to have an impact on your memory as well. And so versions of that have always existed. And historically, if you go even further back, I mean, in some ways, we've never been closer to facts than we are now. There's this whole idea of like, oh, we're living in this post-truth or blah, blah, blah. But that is not true. I mean, we didn't even know how to write for a long time. We had no way of reliably cataloging information, never mind the scientific method, never mind reliably sharing it with one another or fact-checking quickly with things like Google. So, I mean, we're so close to facts. But that, in some ways, I think is the worry, is that we've gotten comfortable feeling like we can just access things that aren't modified or that are less likely to be modified, and now they're more likely to be. And that can interface with our memories.
So just on a practical, is there like a protocol for self-modifying memories so you can live a happier life?
There is, yeah. It's called cognitive restructuring. When you actively, deliberately change an aspect of a memory, usually for some therapeutic outcome, so to be happier, to be better in some way.
That's really interesting, right? Like not just for if you have some kind of issue, but just how to have a life well lived, right?
Yeah.
Does that work?
Yeah, it totally works. I mean, I do it all the time. It's about thinking about experiences you've had, positive or negative. Usually the negative are the ones we need to work on more. And thinking instead of, wow, how terrible was that? Thinking, what did I learn from that? What has this given me that other people haven't experienced? What is it that it taught me about who are my friends? What are these insights that I've won from this experience? And so I think that is an important part of resilience that we ideally need to celebrate and teach more than the opposite, which is hanging in the negatives.
That's probably really good for relationships too, right? Together you form the collective memory and you work on that. You can just fabricate or modify towards the positive.
Well, with relationships, one of my favorite research on memories is that if you ask people in relationships who does most of the housework or who does most of certain things,
Sure.
the numbers that they give you, so like someone will say, I do 60%, the other person will say, I do 50%, and you add them up, that's more than 100%. And that's basically always the case. And on lots of different fronts, people will claim that they do more. And if you ask them how much their partner does, they will diminish it. And so one of the tips I always say for relationships in terms of memories is actually just sharing what you're actually doing And so if initially it feels a bit cumbersome because it's quite unnatural to be like, I've just taken out, the rubbish. I've just taken out the bins. Or I've just booked us a hotel. But saying it out loud means the other person's able to perceive it and then can add it to sort of their internal like star chart of how much you've done in the relationship. And they're more like to actually perceive what you're contributing. Whereas we just assume that people have the same memories we do. And that they of course she remembers that I took out the bins. But not necessarily. She might not even have really perceived it. But if you're reminding each other of all the things that you're doing, it can feel more balanced over time.
This memory is just so fascinating.